Food is fuel for your body, your mind, and definitely your sport. But let's face it, nutrition is confusing, and the expectations on girls and women to be thin and have a six-pack are exhausting. If you've ever been frustrated with your body, confused about nutrition, obsessed with eating healthy, or guilty when you don't, underate, overate, or overtrained, and overwhelmed with all the pressure, then this podcast is for you. Nutrition can be easy. You can take control of it, but it might start with letting go of control by asking for help and making a change. I'm Lindsay Elizabeth Cortez, sports dietitian and owner of Rise Up Nutrition, where I empower female athletes to overcome nutrition concerns and perform at their highest level, to stop being confused by all the mixed or harmful messages, and finally have confidence in your body as a fierce, fit, and fueled female athlete. Hi, listeners and fans. I'm here with Dr. Travis Thomas. He is an associate professor of clinical and sports nutrition and the program director at the Graduate Clinical Nutrition Program in the College of Health Sciences at the University of Kentucky. Dr. Thomas is a board-certified specialist in sports dietetics. He has held multiple volunteer and leadership positions within SCAN and served as a leader on the current Nutrition for Athletic Performance position stand, endorsed by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the American College of Sports Medicine, and Dietitians of Canada. He was recently awarded the prestigious 2020 SCAN Achievement Award in Sports Nutrition, which is the first and highest award within this organization, which is the Sports Cardiovascular and Wellness Nutrition Practice Group. Dr. Thomas has 14 years experience conducting human studies involving nutrition and exercise interventions across the lifespan. Over the past decade, Dr. Thomas has served as an investigator on several funded research projects that focused on a wide range of nutrition issues associated with the preservation and enhancement of skeletal muscle function and performance. These studies have focused on understanding the relationship between vitamin D and muscle metabolic function, nutrition and physical function in aging and athletic populations, nutrition interventions to improve endothelial function and to reduce symptoms in patients with advanced heart failure, and investigating nutritional strategies to preserve physical performance and lean body mass in patients with cancer. At the University of Kentucky, Dr. Thomas teaches advanced sports nutrition to graduate students in a novel undergraduate course titled Nutrition for Injury Prevention and Rehabilitation. Dr. Thomas also teaches and directs multiple clinical nutrition graduate courses and directs an undergraduate certificate called Nutrition for Human Performance. So, Dr. Thomas, thank you so much for joining the Female Athlete Nutrition Podcast. We're so excited to have somebody as experienced and knowledgeable as you to come chat with us about all things nutrition.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I want to highlight a few things for our listeners, including one of the things I read off in your bio, which that you were a lead author in the Nutrition for Athletic Performance position stand, which is sort of a holy grail for sports dietitians like myself. You know, I have read that position stand, I don't know how many times. You get tested on it to like become a sports dietitian. So this is, like I said, this is kind of like it. Like if you want to be a sports dietitian, you have to read this thing front to back and know it. So I think it's pretty awesome that you're a lead author on there. And I just have some questions for you. One, like how long does it take to put something like that together, like a position stand that all other dietitians kind of, listen to and take that advice? How long does it take to weed through all the research and create a product like that?
Wow. Yeah, it was quite an undertaking. I would say at least 2 years, maybe closer to 2.5 years from, the very start and accepting this, this honor to lead this project. Yeah, I think me and the co-authors, I think we met at the American College of Sports Medicine meeting in Orlando. I think it was 2014. And we spent a whole day just hanging out together and trying to come up with an outline. And that really sparked and provided the framework for this paper that we worked on for about 2 years before it was published in 2016.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, do you revisit that? Do you have plans to, update or republish as new research comes out or anything like that?
Yeah, so the position stands with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They usually, once they're published, they're usually good for about I want to say 7 to 8, maybe in some cases 9 years, depending on how rich the science is and the topic that's being covered. So it definitely takes a lot of time and patience, but I would expect that there'll be a new authorship team that will be identified probably, I would say maybe next year, next calendar year at some point. So yeah, it was quite an undertaking, but it was a fun project.
Yeah, yeah. So that position stand has been in use, I would say, for the last 6 years, and then so maybe within the next 2 years they might try to reevaluate. But I'd love to hear from your standpoint as somebody who does research all the time. Like, I think people are always looking for the latest and greatest science, but sometimes these topics really, it takes a while to like find something new,
And it's very challenging to condense it down to 20. I think we had 22 pages or so of written text, and we had to cover the entire world of sports nutrition. So it's, again, quite the undertaking. I was really lucky to have some great co-authors as well. I think we really complemented each other. We worked, I think, great as a team. Louise Burke, probably one of the I think she's the most famous sports dietitian, sports nutrition scientist in the world. And then we also have Kellyanne Erdman. She was a former athlete. She was a winter sport athlete, a cyclist, I believe, in Canada. And so she brought a lot of expertise as well. And she currently practices as a sports dietitian in Canada.
Yeah. And so, as you said, you have to look at research of all the research in the field of sports nutrition across the whole world and condense it down to 22 pages, which is not simple. And I am curious to know if in trying to do that, did you get any like pushback or any topics that people didn't agree with or any controversies? Because it can be hard to take all of this complicated stuff and like just come up with a position stand, say, this is our position. Were there any topics that were really controversial?
So I guess we should probably back up a little bit. And what I can do is I can tell you that a key component of the position stand was to perform a comprehensive evidence-based analysis. And the goal of this analysis was to pick a time frame. So the last paper was published in 2009. So we picked a time frame to where we wanted to go back in the literature from about, I think we picked 2006, and then we went all the way up to about 2014. And independent of, I guess, what our goals were as an authorship team, an independent group that was put together by the Academy, and this was all sports dietitians, many of which worked at universities. They sat around and identified key questions that were kind of pressing in the field of sports nutrition that needed to be answered by the literature. And so these questions were answered. They were graded by the team, and then they were provided to the authorship team, which again included myself, Louise Burke, and Kellyanne Erdman. So we incorporated that information that was provided to us in a table. So specific questions, research questions that were graded based on the current evidence. And then we used that information to conduct our own review of the literature and then integrated this evidence analysis into the paper.
Yeah. So instead of just, really like, oh, what should we talk about? Should we talk about fat adaptation or should we talk, it's more like, okay, sports dietitians in the field really need clarification on our macronutrient requirements for athletes in different sport scenarios. And we really need clarification on hydration requirements. And so that's what helped narrow down the topics for this position stand. Is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Then I think the three of us then took it to another level. And what we wanted to do at that point is to recognize that, again, bringing back this 2009 paper that was published, back at that time, we were still categorizing athletes as either endurance or strength athletes with that publication. So our number one goal was to bring up personalized sports nutrition, and that there wasn't a cookie cutter approach to giving recommendations that applied to everyone. Okay. And that there was a lot of overlap in our recommendations, and we needed to be personalized. We needed to individualize our nutrition recommendations based on the current science. So in taking that philosophy and that approach, we then had three major sections of the paper that we wanted to teach in the position stand. So the first part was daily training recommendations. So what does the athlete need to get the most out of their training with their nutrition planning? And what do they need to do to also stay healthy? So oftentimes that's not focused on enough, because obviously that without adequate health, you can't. I mean, it doesn't matter about your training adaptations, and so we have to address that. So we did that with a daily training session component. The second section was on competition nutrition, is what I call it. So this is where you get into the nuts and bolts of pre-exercise recommendations, whether it be carbohydrate, protein, or fluid, during exercise, post-exercise recovery. And then we brought in a third component, which was more or less special topics. So bringing up the issue of what does it take nutritionally to train and compete at altitude or in cold weather. And then we also tackled the topic of dietary supplements in that third section. So ultimately, our outcome was a position stand that still, as you said, endorsed by the American College of Sports Medicine, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and also Dietitians of Canada. We had them involved as well. So I like to think of it as an extremely thorough, extremely vetted, systematic review that evaluated the scientific literature in the field for over a decade and in all the key areas of sports nutrition. And one funny thing I want to share with you is that, we completed our first draft. I remember this like it was yesterday. And it was we were trying to be concise. So we had about 25 pages or so. And we got back reviews from these three entities. These are blind reviews. Okay. And they were all collated reviews. So I got back 30 pages of single space comments, reviews, and things to address. So we went through every single bullet point and addressed that. And, we were pretty confident in our work, and thankfully we didn't really have to change a whole lot. We were successfully, provided rebuttals for a lot of those requests and concerns. But a lot of it too was there were reviews of people from people that wanted practice advice. So they wanted specific case studies, and they wanted, so as there's no way to really do that in a concise way, but then also cover the entire field. So the Academy, thankfully, we have position stands like this Nutrition for Athletic Performance paper, but then also we have practice papers that really kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the actual practice interventions.
Yeah, I can't imagine. You do all that work, you have this great product, and then, we need feedback, but it's always like, whoa, I thought I did a good job, and now I have to go through all this.
To the 2-year timeline.
Yeah.
Guessing all of that.
It was interesting as you were just breaking down like the compartments of it, of, addressing just what does daily fueling need to look like for an athlete to be fit and healthy and just day to day taking care of themselves, which then leads to competition day nutrition. And then kind of the third section of unique situations or special scenarios and special topics. And I was just thinking about it because I feel like that's my nutrition philosophy. If somebody was to ask me what is sports nutrition? I was like, well, sports nutrition is just general nutrition of how are you fueling every single day? And then it's the sexy stuff about what to eat, before a race or on race day or on game day, double session stuff. And then it's the unique things, the tip of the iceberg, the supplements or, tailoring with certain ingredients and products. And so as you were kind of going through that, and I was thinking that's very much in line with my approach to how I work with clients and stuff. It just hit me, how much this has influenced my practice because, I was in grad school from 2011 to 2013. And then it was post-grad school when I specialized in sports nutrition and passed my CSSD and studied this paper. So I'm really just kind of putting the pieces of the puzzle together right now and realizing as I'm talking to you how much your work has influenced my practice and therefore all of my clients, so thank you for that. Because I think I think it's a great approach. It's working. So yeah. Well, since we have you, and you have a history of course of science and doing actual clinical studies or literature reviews and putting together all these papers with so much just information. I really thought I wanted to pick your brain, getting to some details with some specific articles that you've published and stuff. And I think one of your most recent ones was a review study, 2021 review study that was titled "The Validity of Urine Color as a Hydration Biomarker with the General Adult Population and Athletes." And so I first wanted to kind of know, what was the motivation for putting together this review study? Because I think this is one of those topics that has kind of just floated around for years and years and years of like, you can, figure out if you're hydrated or not by looking at your pee. And if it's, a really dark yellow, like a really concentrated apple juice, then maybe you're dehydrated. But also if it's really clear, then maybe you're almost overhydrated. And you want that really, just ideal, like lemonade color urine, which is kind of funny, but it is something that, floats around just as information. And I'd love for you to share with our audience, when you kind of really dug into the research, is this a valid way to assess your hydration status just by looking at the color of your urine?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I first want to give all the credit to the team at Virginia Tech, too, because they reached out to me to kind of help out with my background with the recent position paper and just, to give some insights on where the science was going with hydration. But that team also at Virginia Tech are the experts as it relates to hydration and Dr. Brenda Davey there at Virginia Tech. So Samantha Kostelnik was the lead author on that paper, did a great job putting all this together. And, my summary of this paper would be that I think this is a scenario where I think practitioners, I think sports nutrition scientists have almost become a little too sciencey when it comes to fluid assessment and fluid needs. Now, in the scientific world, certainly we need those protocols. We need those details. We need to be very specific in the protocols that we choose to use to answer specific research questions in the field of hydration. However, I think sometimes that has kind of leaked out into what we recommend to athletes. And I think it turned into, seeing some of this information show up in textbooks where we only truly have an idea of athlete hydration status if we're doing a blood assessment or we're collecting urine. And I think the reality of that is that, there's other easier practical ways by documenting the fluids that you're consuming and also by assessing urine color. And I noticed in some other projects that I got involved in other sports with other sports dietitians around the country, and that they didn't really, give any credit to using urine color because it was not specific enough for them. And so I think that was really what created this project for the team at Virginia Tech, and that we wanted to see what the literature said about using urine color because it seems to make a lot of sense, but we just didn't have a lot of evidence for it. And ultimately, the result of this paper, this review, was that there were 10 papers that we were able to review critically, and we found that using urine color is a valid way to assess hydration status. The one caveat being that it's one tool, and every tool that we have has its weaknesses and strengths, and we just need to acknowledge that. So, for instance, in athletes who are using urine color as a way to monitor how well they're drinking, their urine color may be influenced by dietary supplements or the medications that they're taking. So that's a limitation. So across the board, maybe it's not always perfect for that athlete. However, on the other hand, we know that if an athlete is having a training session in the afternoon or evening, and they spent their entire day with urine color that looks like dark apple juice or something darker, chances are they're probably not hydrated. So I really think the value of this paper is bringing back using urine color as just another tool that we can use, as long as we just recognize the limitations of it.
No, I really appreciate that. And I agree that it's like using these other methods to track or calculate or measure hydration status could be really cool, but we also need something, that's practical for the everyday person, maybe even cheaper, and just to see if it's still valid. And, for me, and I work in a virtual setting right now, like that's really important. I can't measure hydration status on my clients, but I can have a conversation with them about what the color of your pee is and talk them through that and still figure out, how to educate them with their hydration goals based on that. So I think it's really important to, do reviews like this, like you said. And oh man, Travis, in my past jobs, I have many unpleasant memories of doing urine specific gravity, pee tests on my athletes and just having all these pee cups lined up in front of me and testing every single one of them to figure out if they're hydrated or not. And I could tell you by the look or the smell of things. I didn't need this fancy $500 piece of equipment to really tell them. But so I think it's good to kind of just go back to basics sometimes. And so I think that's, a really good thing. And yeah, I do want to touch on for our listeners the supplement piece, because that does come into play a lot with changing the color of your urine. And it's a lot of B vitamins specifically, among a few other things, but B vitamins. So if you're ever taking like a B vitamin complex or maybe even a multi or energy drinks, that might be like, how energy drinks have like 1,000% of your B12 and stuff like that. Those are things that can suddenly, your urine might look like highlighter yellow or something like that, or even orange sometimes. And it might not be dehydration. It might be those supplements. So there are limitations, but it is a good measure. So it's nice to have that validated and have that literature reviewed again. Go back to the basics.
Yes, and we published another paper around that time too, looking at a beverage questionnaire. So that's something too, if some of the listeners want to look into that. It's just a very quick questionnaire assessing fluid intake, all different fluid types, including dairy, just to get an idea of what someone is consuming. And the result of that paper is that it was also a valid instrument that was consistent with what the urine color would tell us. And then also more sciencey measures such as urine specific gravity. So all of those are very much related. So they're all tools that can be used to assess hydration status.
Yeah. Now to continue this hydration topic too, I think it's when I'm working with clients and talking about hydration, I will, run some calculations to give them some sort of guidelines as to how much might be wise to drink. But then it's always tough because then we're in, you can be in unique scenarios of, do you live in Texas where I live, where it's really, really hot? Or do you live in a super humid climate? Or are you at altitude? And your nutrition needs can really vary in those scenarios. And to kind of bring this back to actually the position stand, which you helped author back in 2016, those are things that are addressed in there as well, that, in hot environments, you need to keep up with your drinking even more because you're sweating so much that you're losing more fluids. But at the same time, in cold environments, even though you might not think you're sweating as much, you very often are because of all the layers that you're wearing, and you're still losing fluid through respiration, breathing, but yet you might not have that thirst sensation. So people are still at risk in cold environments as well. And I was just wondering if you could speak briefly on maybe what some of the differences are in hydration recommendations in different scenarios, as well as something in the position stand you guys touched on, which I believe in as well, is that despite our hydration recommendations, you mentioned in the position stand how important it is to really have an individualized hydration plan. So I was wondering if you could touch on these different scenarios and what an individualized hydration plan really means.
Yeah, so many different directions I could go with this, but I think that I think it starts off with us in this paper providing guidelines before exercise, during exercise, and after exercise. And while recognizing that depending on the athlete, the type of exercise, and as you said, the environment that they're in, there are situations when we may need to modify these goals. But then there's also situations when these fluid goals are more or less important, meaning that we don't want to be super focused on all the calculations at all times, and that we need to, in many cases, actually measure out the fluid that we're consuming. So I don't think it has to be that prescriptive, but they're just guidelines. They're ballpark guidelines to get athletes started. And the reason why this is so important is that oftentimes I think in my experience in working with athletes, they may be interested in one aspect of sports nutrition. Maybe it's, am I fueling well enough to support my performance or my recovery? Am I consuming enough protein? In some cases, maybe fluid is at the center of those goals, and in some cases, it's at the periphery. But our goal was to give, again, another tool and some ballpark figures to get individuals a starting point. Because if, there's oftentimes there's scenarios where an athlete may be thinking that they're feeling well, but there's still something not right. Maybe they're not cognitively engaged in the exercise or training. Maybe they're not recovering the way they would like. Many different scenarios, and maybe you just need to look back at your hydration practice again. So these guidelines that we provide is just another way for you to recheck yourself, to use kind of this mental checkbox. Okay, well, I'm consuming enough carbohydrate for my training and intensity. My protein's right. Okay, I haven't thought much about my hydration. I haven't even thought about my urine color. Maybe I need to look at these guidelines and see what I'm doing before, during, and after exercise and competition, and see if there's something I can improve on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a good approach to all of nutrition too, is that these are our guidelines and you do it to the best of your ability. And then if we're still struggling or things aren't optimized, then you individualize and tailor or seek help for it as well to figure out what's the next step or something like that. So, good. Dr. Thomas, a lot of your other research that you've had over the years has tapped into a couple of different supplements, notably a lot with vitamin D, as I mentioned in your bio. I think one study with beetroot, bicarbonate, things like that. So I'd love to first start with your stance on supplementation for athletes. And, I think going back again to this physician stand, whether or not it's your personal opinion, but, one of it is really, a food first approach, and that supplements are something, that can really, supplement and complement your diet. But yeah, I'd love to know your personal opinion on, when and where do you believe that supplements have a place in an athlete's diet?
Oh, wow. So the way I like to approach this is that going back to how we structured this paper, one of the things that we all agreed on as co-authors was that we did not want to have this laundry list of supplements that different athletes might be interested in. And, not even know. So we would have questions about efficacy. We would have questions about safety.
Yeah, and it would go on forever because athletes are interested in all supplements.
And there are other papers that do this, and they do it well. There's papers that have been published recently, more recently than this one, that have addressed that. But the one thing that we came back to is that when you look at the literature critically, and you only pick the papers that have the best methodology, the best statistical design, etc. And then you look at important factors such as safety and efficacy for a wide range of modalities, exercise and training modalities. So what I mean by that is that there are so many supplements out there that have only been studied in collegiate male freshmen doing a single leg extension. So how does that apply to the athlete and someone who's trying to, pursue these very individualized PRs? So really, to boil this down, we only really came up with 4 supplements that we felt were effective in some situations after diet has been addressed appropriately and after other things are taken care of, such as reducing alcohol consumption and taking care of stress and having adequate sleep, etc. So if everything's covered, there might be 4 dietary supplements that may help athletes. And those were basically grouped into the buffers, which are the bicarbonate and beta-alanine, dietary nitrate, creatine, and caffeine. All of the others, there's been a lot of questions about whether it be efficacy or safety or just the protocols that have been used. Because again, those protocols may not translate to all the different types of athletes and what their goals are. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it totally does. So I think a couple takeaways here is, when you think about performance of an athlete, it's number one thing to address is diet, and then maybe looking at, reducing alcohol, managing stress, optimizing sleep, and then, hey, maybe supplements can also help your health and your performance. And I think that's a great approach.
So it goes back to that pyramid that you mentioned too, right?
Right.
Very tip, you might have supplements that we can worry about, but it shouldn't be the center of nutrition planning.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the buffers, the nitrate to creatine, and the caffeine. And I'm just going to bet that our listeners might be a little bit shocked to actually hear that. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but because they might have just been thinking like, oh, weren't you going to say like omega-3s, or weren't you going to say, take iron, like something like that. But even those, when you think about it, it's like, well, iron, yeah, like that's something you can get through food too, versus something, I mean, obviously nitrates we can get through food, but in such a concentrated dose is different, right? Like nitrates we get through beets, but you'd have to eat like, I don't know, 6 to 12 beets to get what you would in a concentrated supplement. Yeah, not very practical to eat 12 beets before, trying to run your fastest race or something like that. So. Hey guys, I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment because I want to let you know about an amazing discount for an awesome company that I partner with, Inside Tracker. In fact, in this episode, we talk about blood biomarkers, which is part of what Inside Tracker does and why I want to tell you about them. They help you optimize your body using science and technology to deliver ultra-personalized guidance. They use cutting-edge algorithmic engines to analyze your blood, DNA, lifestyle, and workout habits, and it's all available to you right now. You can hop online and order your plan and use the code RISEUPNUTRITION, one word, all capital letters, for a whopping 25% off. Seriously, that is a good savings, 25% off. And I hope you know that I don't advertise for too many products on this podcast because I really value personalized and individualized nutrition and care, but that's exactly why I really value Inside Tracker. It helps put health into your own hands, and you do get individualized results. It's based on your blood work. I use Inside Tracker myself. I use it on many of my clients, and if you use the code RISEUPNUTRITION for your Inside Tracker order, regardless of being a personal client or not, then I'm always happy to consult with you via email if you need more nutrition support. So head to InsideTracker.com to learn more. Use the code RISEUPNUTRITION. More details in the show notes. Get that 25% off, amazing discount. And let's get back to the episode and this awesome conversation. Yeah, actually, if I'm remembering correctly, you did a study on beetroot yourself. Is that correct?
Yes, I did. And I also want to point out, because you brought up vitamin D and iron and omega-3, we did have a separate category known as medical supplements in the paper. And, the reason why we put that as separate, because we don't treat those dietary supplements as being ergogenic or being a type of supplement that would improve performance across the board. And the reason why we place them in that category is that there has to be some sort of medical justification, specifically for iron and vitamin D, meaning that we do not recommend routine across the board high-level supplementation for those two micronutrients because it can be harmful over time. There has to be some sort of assay or blood test to help justify the use of that. And hopefully they would also be under the care of a sports dietitian and a team physician to kind of oversee that supplementation practice. Yeah. So sorry to take you off.
No, thank you for that clarification. I think it's really good because, yeah, you shouldn't, like, it's going to help. If you're low in iron, then iron supplement's going to help you. But if your iron is fine, then it's not. And you just need to keep up a normal diet that has iron in it, And yeah. So that's a great clarification. And I think we could also, for our listeners, define the word ergogenic, as you said. I know what that means, but as we said, an ergogenic aid is one that's really something that's helping boost your athletic performance specifically, right? So iron is something that's helping your health, right? If you're low iron, you're anemic, that's helping your health. Of course, it will help your performance too, but caffeine is something that specifically might have a specific role in performance and helping you with reaction time or speed or delaying fatigue and things like that, correct? Is that a good definition for ergogenic, or would you like to expand?
Absolutely. And I like the way you put it too, as far as these micronutrients like iron, for example, really supporting your health. And I think the key distinction here is that if you are suboptimal in your iron status, then you're not at optimal health. And that is what's causing a decrement in your performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that you mentioned earlier when talking about supplements, or just, honestly, research in general, is how specific so many studies are. Like, oh, is this done in a population of 10 college age male football players? And how does that apply to somebody who's a 35-year-old female or something like that? We can't always take this and going to the kind of the specificity of research combined with, as we were just talking about, supplements. I think that's like one of the titles of another study that you were an author on is acute beetroot supplementation does not attenuate knee extensor exercise muscle fatigue in a healthy young population, right? So it's like, okay, we have this research about beetroot, but we have such a very specific thing that we're researching, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I guess I'd also love to hear from you, like, can you expand and tell our listeners a bit about beetroot nitrates, I suppose, because that's ultimately what beetroot supplementation is composed of. And what are some questions that researchers have around the effectiveness of nitrates and or beetroot supplementation in athletes?
Yeah, I'm happy to provide as much as I can. Now, I would say my expertise is more in the vitamin D realm.
Yeah, so which I wanted to get to as well.
But I have done some work with nitrate, and I can tell you this is something I've always been interested in, and it wasn't really because of the beetroot itself. It was mainly because of the fact that nitrates, these dietary nitrates, are found in our food supply, and they're found mainly in green leafy vegetables. And as soon as I recognized that, it really just the light bulb went off, and it's just more evidence to teach athletes that the training diet is so important, and that it's not just X amount of carbohydrate or protein, but what you eat on a day-to-day basis can help with your health and your performance and your training adaptations. So even though my work has looked at some concentrated beetroot juice supplements, beetroot is a highly concentrated source of dietary nitrate. You can get a good amount of nitrate by eating spinach and arugula and any other green leafy vegetables. And there's charts if you're interested in looking at nitrate content of vegetables. So it really, to me, it highlights, I think the most important message here is that it highlights the importance of the training diet and consuming lots of vegetables in your diet day to day.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great advice and really helpful. And it kind of does remind us too that, as much as, and people on this podcast have heard me speak all the time of like, eat more carbs and stuff like that. But it's like, yeah, so along with your pasta, throw some spinach in there because you're getting nitrates. It might not be helping boost your carb goal, but there's other benefits to it, right? And so having foods that are functional, foods that have function, and those green leafy vegetables, the beets, I think celery is another source of it, right? Incorporating those things in. So if you're going to make up a, quick tuna and mayo sandwich for lunch, like chop up some celery, throw that in there, because these little nutrients that you add in on a daily basis mean that you've got, a good healthy dietary source of nitrates that can improve a lot of different things with health and with performance. So I think that's great advice.
I would just add quickly too, the science continues to emerge in this area. And when it first became an area of interest, the primary focus was on how nitrate can alter metabolism slightly to be able to utilize energy more efficiently with less oxygen consumed. So that's literally that rewrote the exercise physiology textbooks when that first came out roughly 10 to 12 years ago. So since then, it's evolved quite a lot in that it's not just a potential dietary component or a supplement that can help with endurance. There's also some good evidence that can help with resistance training, muscle contraction, outcomes that are more specific to the anaerobic or athlete that's more focused on strength and power. So that's an interesting area. It's also interesting to me that, we have so many, if we loosen up the definition of athlete, we have so many individuals, as I think you mentioned earlier, that are recreational athletes that are getting older, and maybe they're retired, or maybe they're not the collegiate athlete anymore, but they're still competing at a high level, and they still have goals with their exercise program. I think there's a role for nitrate in that group as well.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a difference between, right, an NCAA athlete or a pro athlete trying to hit that peak performance. But then it's also like, as we continue to age, honestly, life kind of gets harder, and keeping up at that competitive level, gets harder, where we might need to pay a little extra focus and attention to these nutrients in order to take care of ourselves and stay in the game, which is something so many people are passionate about. So yeah, I think there's a role in both situations. So yeah, Dr. Thomas, let's shift over to vitamin D. Like you said, that's actually a specialty of yours. You've done a lot of research in there. Well, let's just start with why did you go down the path of doing more research on vitamin D? Where does your passion or interest with vitamin D, where did that stem from for you?
Well, that's a great question. When I came to the University of Kentucky, I was a practicing sports dietitian, and I was finishing up learning to be a strength and conditioning specialist. And I was really focused on doing research in athletes. And what I found pretty quickly is that I wouldn't be able to sustain a funded research program by solely working on athletes, unfortunately. And that's just because there's so much interest in the health of our society in the U.S., and a lot of money that's focused in NIH funds and the Department of Defense and different organizations that really are focused on improving human health. So really what I tried to do is I took a lot of the sports nutrition ideas that I had a passion for, and then I started applying them to clinical populations. So instead of vitamin D and performance, I was thinking, okay, how do you keep muscles healthy as you age in a population that's over 65 years of age? Okay, so I kind of transitioned away from that. So we've been able to publish a few papers on vitamin D now, and I think the most exciting work that we've published is how vitamin D may work with exercise to improve and maintain metabolic health. So as you know, skeletal muscle is the largest organ in the body, and healthy muscle is essential for preventing chronic diseases such as diabetes. If you don't have healthy muscle, I don't know if you can really call yourself healthy, because it's involved in not only your exercise and movement, but it's also involved in keeping your body systems healthy metabolically, if that makes sense. Great example is diabetes prevention. So I guess it was about 10 years ago now when we conducted a small pilot trial that was later published, where we had results showing that as older individuals had higher vitamin D status, so more vitamin D in their blood, they also had a higher type of a certain type of muscle fat called intramyocellular lipid, and I just refer to that as IMCL, a certain type of muscle fat stored in the muscle. And at that time, we were pretty surprised by that, because it was well established in the research that if you had high levels of this IMCL, you most likely were unhealthy in some way, related to high levels of inflammation or insulin resistance, which is a marker of diabetes. But, in thinking about this more, we recognized that the population that we were studying in that pilot trial were healthy older individuals. Now, they were not exercising, but they were community dwelling active individuals. So they walked everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they were not obese. So I thought more about it. And, I later hypothesized that vitamin D may be supporting metabolic health in these active individuals. So we wanted to test that out and do some hypothesis testing in a randomized controlled trial. So we set out and got some NIH money to try to study this non-invasively. And what I mean by that is that we were able to use MRI to measure how their muscle fat changed. And we were also able to partner with some folks in biotechnology who had a fancy laser that could be used on the outside of the skin, and that can measure the amount of oxygen being taken up by muscle. as it's exercising. So instead of measuring it, by a mouthpiece on a treadmill, we can measure it through the skin. And what was interesting about our goals with this study is that we were pretty confident that vitamin D was helping metabolically, but we wanted to test this alongside aerobic training because we knew that exercise did improve your health and it did improve how your muscles function. So what we did is we recruited older individuals who were healthy but not exercising. And they also had to be vitamin D deficient. And then we randomized them to one of 4 groups. Group 1 received nothing. They maintained their activity and they received a placebo pill. Group 2 received aggressive vitamin D supplementation and nothing else. Group 3 received an aerobic training program. So a progressive aerobic training program on a treadmill. And then group 4 received vitamin D repletion and endurance training. And we were really fascinated with the results. Briefly, the results that we found, the major outcome was that individuals who received vitamin D supplementation and exercise were able to utilize more muscle fat more efficiently, and also were able to utilize more oxygen in their muscle as a result of their exercise, more so than the exercise group alone, and more so than the vitamin D group alone, suggesting that vitamin D and exercise were working together in this healthy older population. Since then, we've been able to test this a little bit more and do some of my colleagues have done some basic science in the laboratory on cells. And we've found that certainly vitamin D does seem to support how the muscle cell works, how the mitochondria works to utilize energy. It also seems to play a role in how your muscles store individual fats, specifically saturated fats or unsaturated fats, some of which are more inflammatory and others are not as inflammatory. So we know that vitamin D is certainly playing a role in skeletal muscle health. We think that exercise may enhance that. There's still many questions to be answered about this. Some of the concerns that I have moving forward is that there's still a lot of variability in the subject response, suggesting that there's a genetic component as well. Some individuals may respond more than others to vitamin D and exercise. We also have some data that shows that maybe if you only have aggressive vitamin D supplementation, but no exercise, that may affect your muscle fat in a harmful way over time, which is another thing that we need to follow up on. But to me, when you take a step back and look at it from the 10,000-foot view, to me it makes a lot of sense. Though we kind of evolved to exercise, to be active, to train, and get a lot of vitamin D or get adequate vitamin D, and most of the vitamin D we have comes from the sun. About 80 to 90% of what we have circulating, unless you're supplemented, comes from that UVB exposure that we get from sunlight. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I'm long-winded here with vitamin D. I can go on and on.
No, I love it, right? And that's why you're here to shed this amazing knowledge on us. And I love getting into the details of science. And what I think too, when we think about that 10,000-foot view, another thing that I hope our listeners are getting from this is like, old school thinking is like vitamin D for bone health, which is still true. But this newer research is like, no, vitamin D is like impacting us on all these different metabolic levels. And so its role in muscle function is really interesting and just being more metabolically efficient. And it's definitely playing a role. And then if we're metabolically efficient, then of course we're going to see more efficiency with our training and our exercise as well. But now this poses another question. Then you kind of said it makes sense, right? We exercise outside with the sun, vitamin D. It's like maybe evolutionarily, like this is all making sense. But then we have our issues with our athletes in indoor sports, which, like we think about indoor swimming, which I know you have a paper on, or we think about basketball, we think about, indoor volleyball and stuff like that, that now those are some athletes that might actually be maybe even at risk of not optimized vitamin D levels, and it could have an impact on their muscle function as well. I think I don't know if you have anything to say about that. I know you did a little bit of research, a short study on like swimmers, indoor swimmers, and who maybe weren't getting much.
I'm glad you brought that up because my feelings about this have changed dramatically
Ah,
over 10 years. And that
oh,
when I first got into this, and talking to different groups at my institution, I'll leave it at that. The message that was given to me was that, well, you don't want to study football players because they're out in the sun. They're not going to be deficient. And you really want to focus only on the indoor athlete. And since then, there have been multiple studies that show that just about every athlete is at risk for vitamin D, or I should say suboptimal vitamin D status. Not necessarily deficiency, but certainly there's a large group of those as well. And a lot of this really stems on the fact that I think, athletes, I think you have to recognize again where vitamin D is primarily coming from. And we get it primarily from UVB sun exposure. And we have to have that sun exposure at certain times during the day, right? So just because it's sunny at 8 a.m. in the morning on your morning run does not mean you're making vitamin D in your skin, right?
mm-hmm.
I live, and so latitude is important. So latitude is, where you are on Earth from north to south, and that matters because of the angle of the sun's rays and the energy and the photons that come. So if the UVB wavelength is not at the right amount, then your skin cannot synthesize vitamin D. So the latitude and the time of the day matters. So I'm in Lexington, Kentucky, to give you a brief example here. So we're at about 38 degrees latitude. So because of that area and the angle to the sun, we do not make vitamin D from the sun in November, December, January, or February, even if it's sunny.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a key point.
That's a third of the year.
Yeah. And
Quarter of the year, yeah.
if you live further north than me, then it's not just 4 months, and maybe it's 5 or 6 months where you have that situation. So that's something to keep in mind. And also the equipment that different athletes wear. I mean, that's going to cover a lot of the skin in some cases, such as football players. We also know that if you are involved in a sport that intentionally avoids the hottest parts of the day, you are also going to be at a greater risk because you're not going to be at the right time of day. And when I mean time of day, I mean midday. So that's around noon. So in the heart of the summer, like in July here in Lexington, Kentucky, we can make vitamin D from about 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. But as you start getting further away from those hot months, your window closes. So it's more like 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. So that's something to consider as well. So that combined with sunscreen use and equipment, those are all factors that put people at risk.
And our skin color, does that impact?
Absolutely.
So because African Americans are at a different risk of vitamin D deficiency, correct?
It is, but it's interesting because there's also a difference in vitamin D metabolism. And this is not as well fleshed out with muscle health and other aspects of health and outcomes. But we do know in bone health, there is a different amount of vitamin D binding protein found in African Americans because of that difference in comparison to Caucasian, they can get by with less vitamin D circulating that still promotes optimal bone health. So head to head, a lower vitamin D status because of differences in vitamin D binding protein supports more optimal bone health in African Americans in comparison to Caucasians.
Interesting. So they can have lower vitamin D status, but it isn't as detrimental. Is that kind of what you're saying as a Caucasian that might
bone health and fracture risk? Now, but that's the caveat because that research outcome is specific to bone. I can't answer that question as it relates to muscle health or performance because I don't think those studies have been done yet. And more importantly to me, and the research funding that I'm going after is more related to disease prevention and how we keep our muscles healthy. So as we get older, we can maintain that function better and get the most out of exercise. That's the other part of this too, because if you think back to what I said about some of the outcomes that we've been able to identify related to this potential synergy between exercise and vitamin D, and that if there is this synergy that we can better define, people can maybe get by with less exercise. And I know that may sound like a bad message, but as we get older, maybe it's not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, let's face it, there's data too that suggests that, no one's really, unless you're an athlete, and you're practicing toward an athletic goal, most people are not meeting their exercise guidelines.
Right. But it also, when we think about like things like behaviorally, like when you said get away with less exercise, I know exactly what you meant, because it's like, well, if we can restructure what is enough for the aging population and kind of set expectations that can be met, even, then that might help people do it. So, wow. I feel like now I have more questions. That's what happens when you dig into research, right? Then you just get more and more and more questions.
Yeah.
But I think this your research with vitamin D and muscle function is really quite interesting, and that's the whole point of science too. Is once you figure one thing out, then now you have more questions. And so excited to see, what you continue to explore throughout your career and what knowledge you bring to the world. We're grateful for all of it, and can't thank you enough for, sharing everything that you did so far in this podcast today. This was awesome.
And thank you. And it reminds me, in listening to you, one of my graduate mentors told me that the best research creates more questions than it does answers. So, yeah. So
yeah.
Sorry to leave you with so many questions, but it keeps me employed, right? It keeps me going after more grants and publishing more papers, right?
Yeah, it does. And actually, I think that's one more thing I did want to just touch on is kind of it's a little bit of frustration, but it's just the way it is like your interest in sports nutrition. And yet when we have to go after these grants and it has to like cater to, well, the grant is looking for, help with health and kind of general population. And that's good. It's good. We need that. But it's also for people, for the everyday person who's trying to Google, their athletic needs and stuff. That's why it is hard to get specific advice to athletes sometimes, because there is such little research specifically done on athletes. And that's, as we heard you say, that's one of the struggles too, is it's like, well, in order to get the grant to even do the research, it might have to be a topic that, the money is kind of pushing you towards. But it's, like you said, we're so grateful for your work in the field of sports nutrition and getting the pieces of the puzzle together and coming out with something like the position stand that we have to guide us. And I think it's awesome. So thank you for all of your work.
Yeah. And thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah. Do you have like 2 more minutes? Sure. If you don't, that's okay. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. Because we do end every podcast with some more fun questions if you're ready to play along. All right. Travis, if you could eat one food every single day for the rest of your life and never get sick of it, what would that be?
Oh, my wife would tell you it's definitely peanut butter.
Yeah.
I could eat peanut butter every day.
I love it. Are you a crunchy or a creamy fan?
Creamy, definitely creamy.
Awesome. I go back and forth. If I've had creamy too often, then I need crunchy. If I've had crunchy too often.
My kids would revolt if I had crunchy. They couldn't have that. It's a texture issue. They have to have creamy. So we just all are happy with creamy.
Amazing. Amazing. What is your favorite sport to participate in?
Oh, wow. I would say resistance training as a sport. I'm actively engaged in that. I'm starting a shadow boxing routine now. I think I consider that a sport as I get older. Back in my younger days, it was football and basketball. I couldn't get enough of those two.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then how about as a spectator? Sometimes it's different what we do versus what we love to watch. What's your favorite spectator sport?
College basketball and football, especially in my Kentucky Wildcats.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Really big there. All right. And final question. This will be, I'm super interested to hear what you say. If there's a female athlete out there that you think is really inspiring or is a great role model, who would that be and why? And this can be a female athlete that's well-known, professional, or someone in your personal life that you want to give a shout out to.
Oh, wow. I would say here again. I hate to keep it local, but I'm a big fan of Sydney McLaughlin here at UK. I mean, she's done so much, I think, for women's sports. She's a phenomenal track athlete and now a gold medal winner she always has great messages. She's a great follow on social media. I would say she's really the one that I think about first and foremost.
Yeah, good reason to keep it local with somebody like Sydney McLaughlin. And for her too, I feel like not only is she such an impressive athlete, but she was so good at such a young age. And she really, I don't know her personally, but I'm just saying as someone watching her, has such a, she's a role model, even though she got so good, at such a young age. And she's really has a lot of like poise and professionalism and it was just, I was so proud as a spectator to see her in the Olympics and getting that medal. She's a phenomenal athlete. And so keep it local. You have great reason to. Well, Dr. Thomas, thank you again for joining us on this podcast. This was awesome. And I'm sure our listeners learned a lot.
Thank you.
I really hope you enjoyed that episode and thanks for listening. But before I let you go, I have free resources that you can have access to right away, right now, so that you can start fueling your body as a fierce, fit, and fueled female athlete. First, I have your Red S recovery race. If you've ever wondered if you might be struggling with Red S, curious to learn more, or know you have Red S and are looking to recover fast, then you can head to www.riseupnutritionrun.com/RedS and download the Red S Recovery Race. See how you place and figure out the next steps to recovery. Plus, while there, I have a few other great resources for you, including 3 nutrition secrets that every elite athlete swears by, and access to a private Facebook community, Female Athlete Nutrition. So again, to gain access to all of this, head to riseupnutritionrun.com/RedS. That's /REDS. And you can gain access and get the help you need fast. Too many girls and women and female athletes struggle with nutrition, but you don't have to any longer. Become fierce, fit, and fueled. Links in the show notes, and I'll see you next time.